The following is my conversation with Pete Kelsey. Pete is a co-founder of the British cycling clothing brand Milltag. Milltag went into liquidation earlier this year. In our conversation, we talk about the headwinds that the clothing brand faced after Brexit and that the challenges of running an independent clothing brand in Europe. So welcome, Pete. Thank you for coming on. Do you prefer Peter? Pete?
Pete, please.
Pete. Okay.
Only my mum called me Peter.
Okay. Or the teachers, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you for coming on. Like we talked about, I'm writing a blog about kind of the explosion in niche cycling clothing brands that happened, started in, I think, 2011, 2012. And, there were some different factors that contributed to it. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk to you. You are one of the co-founders of the brand Milltag.
That's right.
And so I don't know, let's just jump into it. And if you want to tell me a little bit about, your background and how you got to this adventure that you had with Milltag.
Yeah, sure. So let's spool back. So 1990, I left college and I was working in a record company. So at that time, I wasn't actually designing stuff, but I was dealing with all the external designers. And this was in the era before digital artwork and that kind of thing. So I was doing that, and then I started doing a bit of like design on the kitchen table. I'm not a trained designer, although I did some design modules when I was at college. But I kind of got asked to do some flyers and T-shirts, so I was sort of doing this kind of homemade bits and pieces. And then the Apple Mac kind of revolution came in around about the mid '90s, I guess. And it suddenly became a lot easier and cheaper to do all this stuff in house rather than using agencies. So I got involved in doing that, and we set up an art department, and we were banging out record sleeves and stuff all through the kind of '90s. And yeah, it
This
was a
was
lot
a
of fun.
this was an agency that you worked for, you
No,
ran.
no, I was working for the record company. It was Universal Music, so it's
Oh,
big American,
wow. So you have a
big
background in.
American.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. So Universal, they had Geffen Records and Interscope and all these kind of a lot of the output was actually American stuff, and so we were kind of just running a lot of the designs would come over from America, but we were running the marketing campaigns, the ad campaigns, and
For
every now
Europe.
and again creating our own designs because there was a different singer in the UK. So it was a really good time. It was we had Nirvana on the label and bands like Sonic Youth and Eels and Weezer. That was great. And then we had this thing that Brexit Britpop happened, and we had a couple of bands who were kind of quite big in the UK in that. So it was a quite exciting time. And so I was doing that, and then I kind of got to about 1998, and for one reason or another, the things started to kind of get more difficult. I remember clearly going in and asking for the budget to buy a new CD drive, and these are people who would regularly spend like £1,000 on a lunch, and then suddenly I wanted £200 for a piece of kit, and they said, "Oh no, there's no money," and this, that, and the other. So I thought, oh, okay, it's time to go. So then I set up my own agency, PKD, again mainly just doing designs in the record industry. And
So you were kind of seeing, was that sort of because of the digitalization of music? Probably, I'm assuming, sort of kind of came down a bit on the
I
industry.
think, yeah, I mean that kind of was started to happen then, and certainly in the early 2000s. So when I first started, there was quite a lot of kind of work for a freelance graphic designer in the record industry. But over the kind of first few years I had the agency, the fees were getting less and less and less, and we wanted more and more work. And I remember once some record company rang me up and they had a full page ad in the NME, which was like the biggest newspaper at the time, and that placement might have cost £5,000 or £10,000, I don't know. And they said, "Oh, we've got a budget of £25," and
What?
it's like, oh, this is just like ludicrous. So I started to branch out from that and do kind of more corporate stuff. Doing some stuff in restaurant design, property, that kind of thing. But I also kind of still retained some interest in music, and I set up a business in the mid 2000s. We printed some art prints for a guy who was an artist who also had some kind of quite sort of famous record sleeves for a band called the Stone Roses. I don't know if you've heard of them. They were kind of pretty big in the UK, and the guitarist used to do all the artwork for them. Anyway, I set up a business with him and his manager selling art prints, kind of large art prints, and we used a ticket agency because they were, though in the early 2000s there wasn't much e-coms that was kind of easily accessible. but the ticket companies did have that kind of facility. So it was a kind of joint venture between the ticket people and the band management and myself. We printed these things and started selling them online, and it was really interesting. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a little bit there about how you kind of activate those kind of sales and selling kind of
Online,
art, and so
e-commerce.
e-commerce, exactly. But it was really in the kind of really early days of it. I'm not even sure how we reached out to actually the public, because there was no Twitter, or I'm not sure if Facebook was probably just in its infancy. So yeah, I was doing that, but I've kept on kind of running the agency and that type of thing, and doing different things. I wasn't really that involved in cycling at that period. I kind of got involved in cycling around about 2006, I think. So yeah, that's the kind of the backstory. And
So you
one
had
other thing
this.
actually of kind of I suppose that kind of piqued my interest is I was doing some branding work a little bit later, maybe about 2007, 2008. So again, just before we set up Milltag, for a Swedish like fashion sports kind of crossover label. And again, we would just do art directing the photo shoots and creating all the marketing material. But again, I kind of got a little bit insight in terms of the seasonality of how you release products, how you get stuff out, how you get it manufactured, how you sell it, and that type of thing. Because we were working kind of quite closely with all the different teams. So those two elements kind of came together in my head, thinking, okay, right, there's something here, that we could work on.
So you had some experience in the design. You had worked with the record labels, and then you had your design agency for a few
Hmm.
years. And then once you started seeing this sort of e-commerce, this nascent e-commerce business, and then you had some exposure as well to fashion. So you were kind of getting an idea of, you're starting to see something that was happening here where you could kind of put all these pieces together. Is that kind of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, when I look back on it now, I kind of those things seem to fall into place. When it actually happened, you're sort of not so much aware of it. It's only kind of in
Sure.
retrospect it kind of falls into place. But yeah, so that was how it happened. And then in terms of cycling, it's quite interesting because the very first cycling event I did was in 2006, and it was like a London to Paris kind of charity cycle ride, and it's still going now. It happens every year. It's sort of quite an iconic kind of 3 or 4 day event that various charities put on. And then you finish on the Champs-Élysées the day before the Tour of France rides into
Wow.
town. So everything's out. And so you get to kind
That's
of
cool.
see, the hoopla around the kind of Tour of France. So I signed up and I did that event. And as we kind of rolled out at the start, I kind of turned around to my right just to chat to the person who was next to me. And it turned out it was Ed Calburn, my then kind of, my then partner with Milltag. And it just turned out he was quite a bit younger than me, but we had quite a lot in common, and we were both interested in kind of music and art and fashion. So we just ended up chatting about it. And then, well, 3 years later, he ended up coming to work for me at PKD. So that's how he came into my my realm, I suppose, and that's how we ended up setting up Milltag.
And so he started off as a designer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, first of all, he interned for me. I mean, interestingly, it's a very talented designer, but he wasn't working in design when I first met him. He was working in insurance, but I think he kind of wanted after college to go into like a steady career. But I don't think it was just me, but I think talking to me helped him think, you know what, I'm going to jack this in and do follow my passion. And so he did. He jacked in his job in insurance, went to Goldsmith College, an art college, did a design degree, and I kind of sponsored him through that. He came in and worked for me as an intern in holidays and things like that. And then he came, I think, pretty much straight from college to kind of work at PKD on stuff. And we're still doing some record industry stuff then as well, quite into all of that. So, it was good fun.
And so and then Milltag. So it's Ed Calburn,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
you guys are working together, and then you decide at some point to begin producing cycling wear.
Yeah, so what happened was I signed up to do like a long distance cycle. So I did that London to Paris ride. I quite enjoyed it. I thought, I quite like this kind of long distance cycling. Lark, I was kind of a bit too old and not really fast enough to race, but I kind of liked endurance events. And so I started not actually doing any events, but just going out on my bike and just seeing how far I could ride in a day. And somewhere through that, at that stage, I didn't even have a road bike. I was just going out like on a hybrid. But I heard about this. It's kind of quite a niche event in the UK called London, Edinburgh, London, and it's as the name sounds, you arrive from London to Edinburgh and back again, and the clock's always running, so you just have to grab sleep and food whenever you can. There's no support. So well, that sounds interesting. So I kind of signed up for that, and I bought a road bike. And then Ed was working with me and he said, "Oh, we should make you a jersey, to wear on the event." So we found some dodgy Chinese supplier who could make us two jerseys or something, and we made up the name Milltag just as a fake brand, just to put on the front of the jersey. Didn't know what else to say. I've got it here. Look, I'll show you. I dug it out. So, this is the jersey. I had a Bianchi bike.
Okay,
So
well, yeah, the
yeah,
Celeste.
the Celeste Blue, yeah. So we made that, and we'd made the name, and then we didn't really think much more of it. And then after I finished the event, and we were just kind of kicking around in the office. Said, hey, why don't we do something with that Milltag idea? So, and the name Milltag is interesting. It's actually a Victorian slang for a shirt, and it literally the etymology of it is when the bales of cotton would come in, they would have a tag at the end of it, so you could identify what the material was and what mill it has come from, and that kind of then over time, a mill tag was just became slang. So, we were quite interested in like Britishness and Victoriana because Rafa was the only game in town really at that time. I mean, they'd set up in about 2004, 2005. And of course, they were mining very heavily all that French and Italian culture. And a couple of other brands were just starting off and they were all doing the same, Velo this and Ciclo that. And we just thought, you know what, there is some cycling culture in Britain, and we wanted to try and stick. So all our product names were always British, rather than kind of trying to ape other things. So that was kind of one of the main things we kind of wanted the brand to stand for. But we had the skills, I think I mentioned before, we had the skills to be able to design and build a website, to create some graphics, to create some brand, and we could do all of that in hand. And by then, we're talking about 2010 now, going into 2011, e-commerce was easier to
Sure.
do. You could buy off the shelf platforms through kind of I don't know, maybe Shopify or WordPress or people like that. So yeah, so that was quite, and the idea was we just created, I think, 5 jerseys. That's all we did, and we think we designed 2 jerseys ourselves or 3, and we invited 2 or 3 like graphic designers, graphic artists to kind of collaborate and create their own jersey. And I think we just made 30 of each. So we had 150, I think, in total. And that was it. And that was the start of the business and off and running. And I think Twitter was just about getting going. When did Twitter start? Maybe 2007, 2008.
Yeah,
So
right around there.
started. So that was our main focus, was using kind of Facebook and Twitter just to let people know these things were available.
Yeah, that makes me think of Prendis. I don't know if you know Prendis. It's
Yeah,
a
yeah, of course they do. Yeah, I remember for the caps, but I know they do all the vintage jerseys as well, didn't they?
they use Twitter quite a lot, and they were one of the innovators, I would say, in the UK e-com cycling, kind of a niche there. But yeah, definitely they were big. So you did decide, you were like, I think this is a business. I see Rafa doing this. I see other brands doing this. I think this is a potential business here. Is that what you made that decision and you made some investment at that point?
I mean, at that when we started, it was just a hobby business. It was just a line in the accounts for PKD. And PKD wasn't that big a business, but it was literally just a bit of fun and let's see where this goes.
How
And
many
really for the
employees at the time?
no employees, just Ed and I, and Ed was employee PKD. So
Okay, so it was just the two of you.
yeah, just the 2 of us. And I think no, there was someone else working for me as well at PKD, and a couple of consultants worked for me, but all on the digital side, not on this side at all. So it was purely Ed and I's business. And I think quite early on, I was quite busy with PKD, and it felt like quite a small kind of thing, and I was never kind of quite sure if it was going to take off. So I left Ed really to in those early years. He was doing pretty much all the work, pushing it, and ultimately he became freelance so that he could, concentrate on some other projects as well as doing Milltag. And then around about after a couple of years, he actually left to go to work for an advertising agency, and he was just like working on it in the evenings. And I was kind of doing the sort of logistics and that type of thing, as and when I could. So right from the early days, though, we had this very clear delineation about who was responsible for what, because we were both designers, but Ed was more, passionate and more kind of completely kind of consumed by the project. So he did all the design work, all the promotion, kind of all the selling, the marketing, and I looked after all of the manufacturing, the logistics, the website development, such as it was, and then later on finance and legal, and all, as the company grew, there was just a lot more admin that needed to be kind of dealt with. But we had that right from the start, so we weren't like treading on each other's toes in terms of like who designed this and who designed that, and we did a lot of collaborations as well. That was kind of the main kind of focus of the business. But yeah, but you're right. I mean, you mentioned it. I mean, Rafa were like, they, they opened the door for all of us to walk through. But in this era, they had really kind of created the market that didn't exist before and showed us all that, look, there was a potential to do something. And although we were in very different kind of markets. I mean, our market very much in those early days was like the fixed gear scene in London. We were like really kind of big into that, and the kind of art, music kind of crossover thing.
So it was a sensitive customer for sure.
What's that? Sorry.
Like a design sensibility, you guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was all about a kind of design-led approach. Now, I mean, everyone's doing that now, but it was, most people weren't doing that. In fact, hardly anyone was doing that back in 2010, 2011. And later on we got involved in doing collaboration with bands, with artists, all sorts of different things. And again, that was kind of put us in a kind of a slightly different kind of like niche, really, that was really useful for us, because we had a sense of identity. People kind of knew we were going to get some pretty crazy designs, that was for sure.
Sure, yeah. That's how I kind of, you guys, I would see the designs come across, and you guys had a really strong presence on social media, definitely at the beginning.
Yeah.
Was that also part of kind of what was able to get the word out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, because we were never dealing like huge volumes, often, for either for reasons of economy or scale or reach. We weren't interested in making like 1,000 and then flogging to death. We always wanted to do kind of small runs and sell out, and then have people kind of wanting more. And social media was great for that. And obviously traditional marketing is expensive. Having to kind of go to like magazines, and they'd only give you an editorial if you said you would take out a certain number of ads and that type of thing. We didn't really kind of want to kind of get involved in that game. We thought that we'd be able to reach our market more effectively by social media, and trying to create a little bit of hype and buzz around what we were doing. And it worked. It definitely worked.
So you had these capsule collections that you would just kind of one after the other in a way that would allow you guys to keep the tension on the market, and then just kind of keep some hype around the brand. So was that sort of I guess, did you guys ever have any sort of physical distribution around in the market, or was it always e-com?
Yeah. So as we grew, I mean, for the first, from that period from 2010 to 2014, it was still kind of a hobby business, but it was growing quite a bit. But a few things changed around about that time. We picked up a contract with Wiggle to do some stuff, and that was like big. Suddenly we had to like
Sure.
produce hundreds and hundreds, and also go through all the kind of SKUs and all the stock control, and so suddenly had to get a bit more kind of formal, but that was fine. Although in the end we learned a few lessons about ecom, because they took all the stock and then they didn't promote it, and then they discounted it, and so we kind of walked away from that deal afterwards. But it kind of, we thought, okay, right, this is how this side of things works. And then we started, selling to a few retailers and that type of thing, or maybe in and around London, and actually one in Bruges as well, which we, right up until the end, we carried on working with. And we had this kind of, for the retailers, we tried to do this sort of hybrid thing where we weren't just making any jerseys that you can buy on the website and send it to them. We were creating their own kind of custom branded kit, and they were like part of the Milltag family. So that was quite successful. So we had sort of a distribution model through, and there was quite a few shops in the end that we were like creating kit for, which they were selling, and it was branded as a Milltag kit. It wasn't like a white label product. And then a little bit, later we got bigger again. We had some agents in different parts of the world in North America, Colombia, and to Thailand and places like that. But they were just taking our retail kit, so they were just taking what you could buy on the website and then distributing it there. So yeah, things started to grow quite a bit, from like 2014 onwards. So the reason why I mentioned about 2014 is that we got investment in the business in 2014. Someone who owned a shop in East London, who we were supplying for, wanted to get more involved in the business, and he put some money in. And that, at the time, Ed was working for an ad agency, but it allowed him to leave that agency and come back in and start working full time with me. And when then that period, we really started to push pretty hard to try and grow the business.
So you guys go kind of all in 2014.
We go all. I mean, I still have my agency, so I was still. So the way it worked is Ed was like working full time, and they started picking up some staff to do various bits and pieces. And I was kind of dividing my time 50-50 between PKD and Milltag. I mean, but it was almost invariably spending more time on Milltag just because it was a more hands-on job that had a lot more moving parts and a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, so that was the, and once we started to grow, then we carried on doing the kind of the capsule collections, but suddenly we had like a retail range, kind of more standard, blue, black, grey jerseys. And I mean, the other thing that we were always doing custom kits, it's like a made to order kit for kind of clubs and events and things like that. But it was always on a small scale. But once we started to grow, the club customs kit side of the business became actually much bigger than the retail side of the things. And I think that's true for a lot of cycling businesses. What you see as a retailer or as a consumer going on and just into the e-commerce is sometimes only a small part of it. They're either doing big kind of wholesale deals, or they're doing kind of custom stuff on the side and things like that, because it's a bit more predictable. It's made to order.
Sure, larger orders.
Yeah, well, actually, the thing about the custom market is, I mean, it's interesting. Rafa got involved in doing custom kit 2 or 3 years ago. I think it was 4 years ago, and very quickly got out of it again because it's a hard thing to manage. It's you're always making to order. There's all sorts of jeopardies involved.
Sure, you make a mistake on that logo, and you're out.
Yeah, well, I can tell you. I can tell you a story about that later. But I mean, even things like a lot of stuff is event driven. So your event's on the 1st of May, and then there's a fire in the Mont Blanc tunnel, and the jerseys don't arrive till the 7th of May. The client's not going to pay for them, and there's no end market for that. So it's always kind of time driven. You're always up against it because the lead times that move and extend, and everyone always wants the kit around about the same time, from April through to July, August, September. So yeah, but we were pretty good at it. I've got to say, we had very few problems, and it was, it wasn't exactly on rails, but we had a lot of custom business, and it was. I actually really enjoyed doing it. I mean, Ed was much more involved in doing the collaborations and the kind of more design-led stuff, but I actually just like the process of working with the clients, working with the factory, and getting that process as seamless as possible. And it was a good operation.
And where were you guys producing at?
So our main factory was in Slovakia, and in fact they made our very first jerseys back in 2011. But at that stage we were buying it through a textile agent who kind of introduced us to the factory, because we were only making kind of quite small runs, 30s, 50s, 100s. But then we started working with them direct, just as the volume started to grow. We just kind of we moved to working with them direct. But so that was our main factory. But we had other smaller factories in the Czech Republic, and a little bit out of some stuff in Lithuania and Italy. Apis for caps, who do all the Prenda stuff as well. One or two others, one in Poland. So, but I would say 70%, 75%, 80% even maybe was coming out of one factory in Slovakia.
And so from a product standpoint, did you guys do, in terms of customizations and whatnot, did you have to keep that sort of simple, or was that, like, the product side, was that something that, because it sounds like it was a small operation, and so maybe you, just to keep all the balls in the air, you guys probably had to keep it somewhat streamlined?
You say it was, with the customs kit, it started to become quite complicated. Like, for some of the clubs, they might have 18 or 20 different products they want, everything down from socks to mitts, winter bibs, summer bibs, different colorways, different designs, special designs for the club captain's 50th birthday. So suddenly, there were a lot of kind of product lines, and then when they wanted to reorder stuff, it'd be one of this and three of that and four of that. So it's small, but each one of those has to be kind of processed as a separate order and dealt with by the factory. And I've got to say, the factory were just so fantastic, brilliant company to work with. They were so on it, corrected all my mistakes all the time, because I was forever sending them an order for a set of mitts when I wanted them, a hat or something. So, they were brilliant. But yeah, it was a lot of work, just because, there were, I say, lots of kind of small individual pieces. It wasn't like you were just making 10,000, sticking in a warehouse and selling them. You were constantly having to, each one of those pieces had to be designed, they had to be kind of created, they had to go through a kind of a pre-production process. So, and you imagine that multiplied then over 40, 50 clubs, and suddenly, it's just a huge volume of kind of artworking, design, pre-production to, just to keep abreast of. But, we managed it, but, it was, yeah, there was a lot of work involved. It kept me pretty busy, put it that way.
And how did you guys where did the clients for the clubs come from? Was it just word of mouth?
A lot of it was kind of on recommendations. Like, for one, one of our biggest kind of, it was a club, it was an organization that every year a lot of people in the property industry do a cycle ride from London down to Cannes in the south of France. And there was an organization, which was like a charity organization, that arranged these people to go in teams effectively and kind of have like a mini race, and they were all in kind of mini Team Skies and Movistar or what have you. But each one of those teams was sponsored by like these large property businesses here in the UK, large kind of corporate businesses. But through that, they had maybe 200 or 300 people doing that event. And of course, we were the sponsors of the kit, and we provided all the kit. And, that time of year, there was gilets and jackets and, it's a big, big delivery. And it's great because it always came in January, which is like a really dead time for us in the business. So from a cash flow point of view, it was absolutely marvelous. But each one of those teams was made up of like people working for like smaller kind of organizations, structural engineers or property developers and what have you. So a lot of those people liked the kit, and therefore they would come back or go back to their club and say, "Oh no, I wore this kit for this event, and it was really, really good. This company Milltag, we should get them to do our kit." So from working in kind of like in the corporate world, it would then spread out to people's kind of individual kind of personal interests. So that was the main driver for it. But obviously, we had a website and social media, and we were doing all this, all the basic marketing stuff you would do to get to that. But even then, it always felt like we never had enough clubs. We always knew there were more out there, and I never wanted to aggressively go and try and poach someone else's business. That was never what we were about. We all, people came to us, that was great. But yeah, so there was always more club kit to have, but sometimes there's a lot of inertia with clubs. They've been with the same person for 10 years, so they don't really want to change, or they're buying it really, really cheaply, and it's just not worth us getting involved, because there'd be no margin in it for us. So yeah, we did well with the club stuff, but there was always more out there that we didn't manage to kind of land. So we were always chasing for more business, that's for sure.
So you had the inline business, you had the capsule collections, and you had this custom clothing. And this
Yeah.
was kind of the three areas of kind of revenue that were coming in.
Right.
And so from 2014, when you guys really kind of hunkered down up until maybe we say COVID, what did that business look like? Were they all three kind of growing? Was one growing more than the other?
So I'd say that all three were growing. I mean, the business was doing well each year, was maybe putting on 25% in
Wow.
turnover, which is going up to about 2018 now, 2019.
That's great.
So yeah, no, it was, it's not spectacular, but it was steady, and it was, our margins were tight. So, we would never make a huge amount of money at the end of the year, but we never lost money or borrowed money. We were always solvent. But I suppose, we started to move into around about that time. We did have our own kind of capsule collection, so just of kind of regular products that you could buy, bib
Sure.
shorts and and we bring out like a summer collection. We never really did a winter collection because it just wasn't really worth it. But allied to that, we started to do a lot more collaborations. So we started doing collaborations first with bands, but then Ed used to go to like what's called the brand licensing show, and he picked up a lot of licenses for all sorts of kind of different products for people who were looking to kind of expand, or license their product outside of their kind of marketplace. So we did a really successful one with TfL, Transport for London. I don't know if you know about that one, but we've got the old moquettes, which are the designs for the tube covers, seats, the kind of quite distinctive kind of modernist designs. So we did a couple of those, and they were really kind of popular. And Roller picked up on that and did a photo shoot on that as well. So that was a really nice one to do. We did one with the band Motorhead. That sold all over the world. Never sold so many 4XL jerseys in my life for the Motorhead campaign. And then we did one with the artist Peter Blake, who is the guy who did the Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and lots of kind of quite famous kind of art, around the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s. But he was also a cyclist. He was a member of a cycling club in East London back in the 40s. And so he kind of did an homage to his old cycle club. So that they were great, that they were really good for profile. But the downside with those is that we never were making huge volumes, so the cost quite high. We had to do a bit of marketing, photo shoots and that kind of thing to get them off. So there was some costs associated with marketing, and we were on a profit share. We had to give like 50% of the profit
for
away.
the licensing.
Yeah, but we never had to pay anything up front, so we always would pay a lot higher kind of share of the profit over to the person, because otherwise they'd ask for like £10,000 or something like that,
up front.
And that's usually the way with a lot of those deals. And Ed was really, we were both kind of football fans and soccer fans, you say in America, and we really wanted to do some stuff in football. But football is a closed shop. They want millions up front.
Oh, sure.
And actually, in fact, we found that a lot of time the deals that they had with their kit supplier precluded any form of sports, even if they're not involved in it. If they want to do it, they'll license it themselves. But Nike, Adidas, even though they're not really involved in cycling anymore, they wouldn't allow you to do that. But we did do one for West Ham, which kind of went kind of under the radar. And actually, the year we did the West Ham, it was our most successful season ever. So we had quite a bit of success with our West Ham cycling kit. So we were doing, that was all going pretty well, that side of things. So, in terms of the turnover, it was all going up, but, the margins were getting, tighter and tighter. And the other, big thing as we run up to kind of COVID that happened was we had the Brexit vote. Now, that didn't really affect, it was at 2017, I think, that didn't really affect the movement of goods that much at that stage. But what it did affect was the exchange rate, because the pound lost 20% of its value, in the first year after the Brexit vote, and has never recovered.
And you guys, that went straight into your guys's, because a big part of your business was outside of the UK.
We straight into, in terms of all our manufacturing was outside of the UK.
Okay.
So our cost had
went
increased
up immediately.
And we just couldn't pass that on to the customer, because part of me was thinking, oh, it'll come back, it's a temporary thing, or whatever happens. But of course, it never did. And yeah, we were like tied into like deals. We would do deals like at those days we were like trying to win business from the larger clubs, so we'd have to give volume discounts. They say, okay, we'll give you £20,000 worth of business a year, but we need a 10% discount or so. So we were already on quite good prices, but you had to do it because it was all about trying to kind of get more and more volume to the business, because the more volume, the more profitable business could be. But so that was really kind of eating into our kind of like profitability at that time. So
it must have been really hard to have to eat 20% increase in your production costs.
Yeah, I know it was. It used to break my heart, I promise you. I used to get out the old invoices where I had write on the exchange rate and it said 141, and then when I was paying like 109, like a year later, it was pretty, it was tough to take.
So what was that? What was that like? Because it feels like the business continued to grow, but the business wasn't nearly as profitable as it once was after Brexit.
Yeah, I'd say that was that the exchange rate definitely was a factor there. I mean, some other things as well that we moved into a new like showroom studio shop, which is a really beautiful space in Shoreditch in East London. And we got a really good deal on the rent because the tenants had basically fallen out with the owners, and so they'd taken out this long lease and just needed to sublet it because they were closing it down. So we got a good deal on it, but there were kind of costs associated with that because it was a shop. We were kind of invested a bit more in stock to actually have to sell in the shop part of the business, and just a little, just invested generally in like trying to kind of turn it into kind of atelier studio because we wanted people to come and like order their custom kit and have like a proper like consumer
Sure.
experience, not just kind of
In
some guy.
East London.
Yeah, and it was great. We had this huge boardroom table, and it sounds like a folly. We didn't buy all this stuff; we just managed to inherit it. But even so, there was like more increased cost now with just supporting that kind of activity. And the shop thing never really, because it was on a kind of side street, not on a main commercial street. And we had our license allowed us to sell stuff, but we didn't really get people walking in. And then when people did walk in, we were like busy working, so we couldn't really be bothered dealing with them. So it wasn't, it kind of that side of things didn't kind of work out. But like everything, we were pushing, trying every single kind of avenue we could to push both the retail side of things and the custom side, and I was really focused on trying to make trying to create like a proper customer experience for buying custom kit, and to some extent it did work. Our custom kit business in 2019, 2020 really grew again. Partly as a result of having this space, and we put on some events there. We had a quiz night there, and had a couple of our clubs had a kit launch there. So we started to build a community, which I see a lot of businesses doing that now, and we were very anchored, in the kind of London cycling scene. Most of the London cycle clubs, we were involved with, making kit for at that time. So it was good.
And so business, you were able to. I mean, the Brexit and the exchange rate was a real hit to the business, but it feels like you were able to kind of plow through that and continue to make it work.
Exactly, yeah. I mean that's definitely, the business was doing great, and but as we go forward, like to sort of beginning of 2020, so before the COVID thing happened, well, towards the end of 20, I suppose I'm trying to remember, 2019, 2020, I'd kind of been working at the Milltag business for 10 years then, and I'd also been running PKD at the same time for since 1998, so for 20 years. And I was getting, I was just a bit sort of tired, or because running both businesses was quite hard, and I just kind of wanted to have a little bit of a sort of a step back. So I had a chat with Ed, and I'd planned to take 3 months off at towards the end of 2020. So I was talking to him about how we could do that, and we kind of thought, what, maybe we can bring in a kind of a partner, or bring in, form an alliance with someone, see how it goes. So we started to talk to a couple of people that we were kind of doing some work with already, and one of them was like a large manufacturer in Europe, and we had quite a few conversations with them, and it looked kind of pretty hopeful, and it seemed like it was going to be a really good kind of resolution for us, because it would, after my 3 months off, it was still going to give me, some kind of exit where I could move away from the business. And Fred as well. I think we both had felt like, we'd taken the business pretty far, we'd done pretty well, but it needed, like, there was, even by then, there was a lot more competition. It was harder and harder to kind of win new business, certainly on the custom side of things. There's more people moving into the market all the time. And on the retail side of things, apart from our collaborations, we were finding it really, really difficult to kind of find a kind of, a place in the marketplace, because there were so many kind of new brands entering all the time. We've had like a new story to tell, and we've been around for 10 years. Anyway, and then COVID happened, and obviously the conversations we were having with our supplier kind of dwindled away to nothing, as everyone just battened down the hatches. And we were more affected than other businesses, because by that stage, 70% of our business was in the custom kit market.
Sure. And the events,
a lot of the custom
all
kit
stopped.
was events. A lot of it was event driven, yeah. Corporate events. We're doing a lot of kind of corporate
Sure.
event driven stuff. So that absolutely went. or just 20 people going off to Mallorca for a week and wanted some kit to wear. So, and the clubs obviously over here you couldn't really ride together, and then it kind of ebbed and flowed all the way through 2020 and into 2021. But of course, people didn't really want to commit to events or putting stuff on, so that we were quite badly affected by that. Not terminally though. I've got to say, the business, the retail side of the business still did pretty well.
Well, yeah, because that was a time when everybody wanted cycling kit.
Exactly, yeah. But we didn't have that much. That was the thing, and I wasn't really kind of in a position to pivot straight round to think, oh, right now we're just going to do consumer stuff, and it just takes a while sometimes as well to for the business to kind of turn around and say, right, okay, this is what we're going to do now, because
So
still,
the wave of COVID, you guys weren't able to really take advantage of it because the custom business was just kind of shut off almost immediately, and then to kind of switch on the retail business to really ramp it up, it was going to take some time, and you probably guys were competing with all the other brands
exactly.
that were coming to the producers.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it just felt like, how do we kind of turn this around and just do just the retail stuff when it was such a crowded marketplace, and we were already kind of being squeezed out before COVID. So it just felt like, I mean, now obviously, obviously, there was a big, huge boom, and obviously there's a kind of now a bit of a long tail to that boom and a decline. But at this time, it just felt like, first of all, we just need to batten down the hatches and just try and kind of get through all of this. So I remember, I mean, we didn't take any loans. There were government loans available that you could take. We didn't take any of those. We furloughed some of the staff, but I didn't take any furlough because I was still working in the business, and I thought, it's a bit disingenuous to take money from the government and then carrying on trying to get new business. And we had this thing like a rota system where people were working like 2 or 3 days a week, so you could be part-time furlough, and that there was 4 of us, I think, in the business at the time, or 5, and we had like a rota. So we say, oh, you're working today and you're not. I mean, and it was just I just felt it was kind of, we wanted to try and keep things going. We weren't just going to shut down the business and see what happened, because there was still some activity. There was still people wanting stuff. Obviously, there was a retail orders that need to be fulfilled, but there was still some activity. There were some clubs who needed stuff, because once they started riding again, there was a bit of latent demand there. But it obviously, as you know, with the lockdowns and things, just kind of rolled over for about 18 months. So it was all it was just very difficult to plan and predict what was going to happen. You were just kind of reacting to things all the time. But I remember we obviously had the shop and all these fittings, and I had to find somewhere to put all of that, because our lease was due to expire in July. So I had to decant this whole office. I got my 2 sons came along and helped me, and I got a van and drove it all the way down to a lockup in southeast London, and piled all this stuff in. But then I had to bring all the stock back to my house because I was the only person with any space. So I had it all in my bedroom, all these piles of boxes and dump bins, and I would be picking orders from my bedroom and then going out to the post office on my bike. And I think it literally felt like when we started the business in 2010, we'd gone back kind of full circle to fulfilling orders in your bedroom. But I was really pleased to still be busy and have something to do, because I know a lot of people were just staring at the walls going mad, and at least I felt like we were still running a business, and there was there's still a lot to kind of deal with then and take on, and we actually ended up moving 2 or 3 times. I had to get a temporary warehouse space, because as things started to pick up, I think it was around about the summer of 2020, we had a customer service guy working for us, and he was working from home, and he was coming over to my house and sitting in the garden, and we were working on stuff. And I just thought, I need actually somewhere where the deliveries, the UPS trucks arriving daily, delivering stuff. And we all got a bit ludicrous in the house. So we had a temporary place just in northwest London for a while. But then we took a new studio in 2021, I think, and kind of relaunched the business then.
And so in 2021, so you guys kind of had to see what was going to happen, but then you saw that things were really starting to pick up, I suppose, in the beginning of 2021. But were you able to get factories to answer the phone?
Oh yeah, no. So the factories were great. I mean, they had in Slovakia, they had quite a severe lockdown there, but people were coming in and working in masks, and they were, in fact, all the factories, and maybe in Italy that there was maybe in 2020 the first part they shut down for a bit, but wasn't ever a problem as I recall getting the product.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, no, we didn't have any kind of issues then. I mean, there were supply chain issues in 2021 just because of availability of products and things like that, but we weren't really sourcing a lot of stuff from China. Everything was being come from
Europe. Okay.
Europe. And yeah, so that wasn't an issue. It was just the looking at business, you have to be kind of optimistic, and I'm like a very kind of optimistic person. So we took a new lease on a brand new space again out in East London in 2021, and literally the month we moved in, the government announced like another 2 month lockdown or whatever it was, and yeah, that was kind of like, and I used to like, cycle over on my own because we weren't supposed to be working together, but I kind of like the ride over there. So I was just like going into this empty space and working there in the middle of winter, and yeah, it all felt like, really, is this it now? But you have to be positive and think, well, there was an investment in the future of the business, and but yeah, so that was kind of where we were. I think maybe it was 2020 actually, back end of 2020 we moved into that because I worked there all through 2021. Yeah, so yeah, it was tough for us for sure. I'm sure it was tough for a lot of businesses, but we managed to come through it okay. I think our turnover had dropped by about 30%, I'd say, in 2020. So difficult, but not terminal. We hadn't
Sure.
taken on loans. We probably made a small loss, and the government COVID thing definitely kind of helped, covering the kind of wages. But things did kind of get back to normal, and felt like by 2021 beginning 2021 we were kind of back on track. But the business is pretty seasonal, so you just never really know until the year's over. At any one time it can feel fantastic, and then another time it can feel like tumbleweed and there's nothing happening. So yes, it's tough.
So so once 2021 kind of, you guys were able to kind of keep things afloat, get through COVID, and it sounds like the demand, because there was huge demand in
Yeah,
21, which, in 22 kind of changed because people's kind of habits change. But you left the business in 21.
I did. Yeah. So I mean, there's two or three things really that came together for this. So I said to you, before COVID, we were talking to a potential partner, which eventually became, are you going to buy us and absorb us into your business, and we can kind of provide this service for you or provide this brand for you. And we got quite close, but we just couldn't agree. And then COVID happened, and the talk just never really started again after that. And then we had conversations with three more companies at varying kind of degrees of seriousness. And each time you kind of build a perspective for your business, you talk about your history and what you've done and all the things. And it's all quite kind of exciting, and they're showing interest and they're really excited. And then for reasons often not to do with money. It's not like, oh, we're not going to pay you that. It was more like, we can't see how you fit in with our existing business, or your business is competing with a brand we already have, and therefore we don't want to kind of create kind of internal competition. They just kind of those kind of discussions just kind of fell away, and it's just so dispiriting when that happens, because you kind of think that you start planning and for the future and think about all these things that this particular company can do to kind of help you overcome your problems. And by this stage now, the Brexit was starting to really kind of bite. It was getting more difficult, certainly more difficult to sell into Europe. It was a nightmare. Just everything was getting stuck in customs, and then angry customers saying, oh, I've had to be shaken down and pay €100 for a cycling jersey and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
So that was a nightmare. And getting goods from Europe wasn't so bad, because at that stage still the UK wasn't imposing any kind of like a customs discipline. So goods were moving quite freely from the factory into the UK, but going the other way was a nightmare. And there were just kind of problems everywhere, and it just felt like a larger company could help us with some of these logistic problems which are coming down the line. So, but it didn't happen, and I think both Ed and I were pretty kind of deflated by that whole experience. And then Ed had left London during COVID because he has a young family, and he moved to Leeds, which is where he's from. So he was a bit more kind of absent, really, physically, and kind of through lockdown and everything like that. I think he started to kind of work on some other projects and lose a little bit of kind of interest, really, in the Milltag brand. And I was working really, really hard, just trying to keep the show on the road.
Sure.
So we kind of sat down in the summer of 2021, and Ed and I are good friends, or still are now. And it was very conciliatory. And we said, look, we need to kind of change something. And one of us has to kind of like step down and, how's this going to work? And through those, we were just discussing how that was going to work and who was going to step down and how that might look. And then one of the minor shareholders in the business kind of stepped forward and said, look, I kind of want to get more involved in running stuff with Ed. So, I'll make you an offer. And I said, okay, well, it was a bit of a shock because I was kind of at the time thinking about how I would take the business forward. But ultimately I wanted some kind of end to it, a resolution, to know what's going to happen the next kind of 2 or 3 years. So so I accepted the offer, and we just kind of worked together for me to kind of exit. I think it was maybe in August or September, October, something like that. And I said, like, at the end of the year, I'll be out and I'm available for you. If you need me to do anything, or you need me to kind of work on anything, just give me a shout. But I've got my other business to attend to now. So that's kind of how it happened. It happened quite quickly, a little bit kind of out of the blue. But as I said, I was just pleased that I managed to kind of get some kind of closure on it, because it had been such a fantastic run. It'd been such a brilliant journey that we've been on. And my kind of favorite sport in the world is cycling, and then suddenly that to be your job and to be kind of inside and doing it, because obviously there was a making of the cycling and the cycling that I managed to do as part of my job, and then there was kind of getting involved with professional cycling. We sponsored the Tour of Yorkshire, we sponsored the Tour of Oman, and some other kind of small places. And suddenly, that was with the ASO. That's like working with the Premier League
Tour de France,
football.
yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and suddenly we were like VIP guests we were this tiny little business, really. We were VIP guests at the Tour of France. We were sitting in the Maserati following the race and the Tour of Yorkshire. It was just incredible, It's just like, where else would you get that kind of access, just from basically supplying some kind of cycling jerseys for some people. So yeah, so I was, it was a great run, and it kind of came to an end, but not in a kind of a tragic way or a huge bust up or a falling out. It just, COVID, Brexit, circumstances, and competition in the market, all those things kind of combined to make me think, what, this is a time for me to bow out here. And I've managed to keep my other business going as well. So
Yeah,
amazing.
that sounds like for you, maybe it was an easy decision because you had kind of seen the business in all of its flavors.
Yeah.
You had seen it ups and downs, and probably at that point you were probably like, look, maybe you just needed to, sounds like maybe you just wanted to dedicate yourself to your main business and just call it a day. And it sounds like for you, I mean, in hindsight, it was a good decision.
Yeah, definitely, I'd say so. Yeah, I mean, I missed it. Certainly I remember in 2022 when I was just sitting here, and because I'd given all that time, I had offices, and even when I had PKD as an agency, we had staff and offices, and then suddenly I was just on my own, in the bedroom where I am now, looking at the four walls, thinking, God, is this it? And I was used to being like so busy, I used to cycle into East London, and I knew as soon as I sat down, I'm sure most people working life are probably like this anyway. I've got 10 things to do before 10 o'clock, and they'll be in my head to make sure I do them. Whereas now I sit here and I put the radio on, and I've got one thing to do by the end of the day. And so I kind of miss the drama and the drive of it all, but I don't actually, miss the business as such, because it was getting harder and harder and harder. And I think anyone, I take my hat off to anyone who's stepping into the market now, because it's a great thing to do.
No,
And if it works, right, and even if it doesn't work, it's a great journey to go on, to make something, to be part of something, to build something up. It's such a blast, and if you love cycling as well, it's even better. So
it is, but I think your ex colleagues were in a situation now with, again, hindsight, that there's just too many brands out there. There's too much product in the market right now. That basically what happened was, everybody thought that COVID was going to continue. The COVID bump of, not everybody, but there was this COVID bump of business. And so I think a lot of clubs or a lot of brands really stocked up and thinking that this was going to go on, kind of keep going. And I think I'm kind of speculating here, but it sounds like your ex coworkers, for anybody that doesn't know, that Milltag was put in liquidation a couple months ago. Is that correct?
I think in January, yeah, a couple of
January.
months ago.
So that they must have been, really fighting against because what I see is everywhere you look, there's cycling clothing on sale, from Rafa to, Castelli, everybody. And so it makes me think that, it's a really hard time to be in the cycling clothing business right now.
I agree. I mean, I'm kind of outside. So I'm on the outside looking in now, but I see the same as you, and I see the same reports in the cycling news and the cycling press about the kind of complete kind of oversupply, and one or two people who I'm still in contact with, from other businesses, have said the same thing. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure last year, I mean, I didn't really have much kind of contact with Ed and the other directors in 2022 because if they needed me, I was here for them, but I wasn't gonna get involved telling them what to do. But yeah, for sure, they obviously hit the same headwinds that I was kind of experiencing in 2021 that kind of led me to think, this was just getting kind of harder. It just, I think, increased and exacerbated in 2022. So it definitely made their job more difficult. And I think, there is still, because we're doing a lot of custom kit, there's still a kind of viable business in the custom kit
Oh,
market.
absolutely.
But it's hard, and there's always someone out there to eat your lunch, and it's margins are tight. I mean, like for I was telling you, we manufacture in Slovakia. Well, in Slovakia, their wages have gone up by 20%. So forget about it. So all the imported materials from Italy, which has gone up 15%. So there's all those costs. But specifically, we used to manufacture in Slovakia because, the hourly cost rates for workers there is probably half what it is in Austria or Germany across the border or in the UK. But now it's probably, only about 25% lower because a lot of those companies have moved in there and used Slovakia for like a large volume product. Jaguar Land Rover over there, for instance.
Sure.
And that pushes wages up for everyone,
Right.
which is great
The
for
demand.
them, great for their economy, and great for the country because the rising tide lifts everyone. But when you're in a business that is kind of doing the kind of arbitrage between the cost of manufacturing
Right.
there and delivering to the UK, it makes it kind of almost unviable to kind of manufacture there and make a profit.
Yeah, it's not a business anymore if you don't have that.
Not exactly, yeah. So I mean, so for that's that's a kind of an issue around that. I mean, I think a lot of when the large kind of European manufacturers, they're based in Italy, but a lot of them are moving manufacturing out now beyond the eurozone, or maybe in the eurozone, but beyond the kind of euro currency zone. So Romania, Bulgaria, or even places like Morocco, things like that. Again, because that's the only place really where they can kind of get a margin in terms of getting the stuff made and getting it back into their marketplace. So yeah, I mean, it's tough out there, but I think there is. I was saying to you, over last year, I didn't do any work in cycling whatsoever. I kind of was just had to focus on my own business, and there was stuff going on, so that was quite good. But just latterly, I started to get involved in doing some small bits and pieces. So I've just done some caps and some posters for a kind of couple of cycling events, like non-for-profit cycling events. And yeah, I mean, I think there is an opportunity, and I'm looking. What I'm not going to do is set another brand up because it's these days the amount of like marketing and the amount of, I mean, apart from all the other things we said about manufacturing something and making something and the cost of doing that, but just the time now involved in kind of marketing is just overwhelming. You're trying to build your community and find your own space. But I think there might be some opportunities in like within the circular economy and what we can do to kind of make cycling clothing kind of, I wouldn't say so much more sustainable, but actually reuse and recycling and getting it back into circulation again. And whether that's overstocks or whether it's kind of old stock that people don't need anymore. So yeah, I mean, there are opportunities out there in the cycling industry, but I think the model of creating a brand, making some products, and putting it out there is not one of them.
No, like I said, so one of the topics that I that I wrote about recently was how, how much easier it was to start a cycling brand in 2012, 10, 11. And that was something that was sort of a wave that you guys were able to ride as Milltag to get a much wider audience. And now I think what kind of to close that loop was, I think that arbitrage has been kind of filled in a sense that a lot of entrepreneurs and brands have seen the opportunity, they went for it. And I think along with COVID, I think there's enough brands out there. There's probably too many brands out there now. And if, at least for kit, just traditional kit, I think custom clothing, like you said, if you have good margins and you have a good service, that is still probably a pretty good business. But again, it's almost like just making t-shirts at the end of the day, because you're not really creating a brand and you're not really creating any sort of, it's hard to differentiate. I mean, sure, there's probably demand out there, but it's hard to differentiate yourself, and it's hard to build anything that you can, see grow over the years in terms of like kind of, because what is the differentiation in buying something from a manufacturer? So it does make that a little bit difficult. But yeah, no, this was really fun to discuss kind of your journey. It was actually a much I was expecting it to be a bit simpler.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it was quite a complex journey, and it was really interesting to kind of hear the boots on the ground discussion about how you guys did it. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on today. So where can
My
people
pleasure. It's been great to talk it through and I say relive a few old memories.
where can people find you, Pete, on the internet?
Oh, just pkd.co.uk. And I mean, it's just my design business and some lots of bits and pieces. There's some photography stuff that I do. And yeah, and I actually archive some of my cycling stuff that I do. So not just the business stuff, but I make some small films. I do some kind of long distance cycling adventures, and I sometimes make kind of little short films of those. So there's boring stuff like that on there.
Where can people find those?
On there, pkd.co.uk, there's like a separate tab for cycling, and there's all sorts of stuff on there. So,
Okay.
yeah, so it's been great though, and yeah, well, good luck with your the podcast and everything. I'll kind of keep my eye out for it. I'll bookmark it.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I'll just end the recording here.